Good afternoon, everybody. I'm here this afternoon with Dr. Mark Axelrod, who has a joint appointment in the Department of Fisheries and Wildlife and James Madison College. And unlike most of your professors who just have PhDs, Dr. Axelrod has a degree in law as well. And hopefully we'll get a chance to talk to him about how somebody with a law degree and a PhD ends up doing research and teaching at Michigan State University. So welcome, Dr. Axelrod, and I'll let you give a little bit more background as to who you are.
All right, thank you very much. Professor Eckhart asked me to talk a little bit about my academic background and why it kept going and going and going as a graduate student. Part of that is I really enjoyed grad school and the process of learning at that level. But part of it is my interest really is in integrating different ideas and crossing disciplinary boundaries. So I felt I needed a good basis in a number of different disciplinary areas in order to really be able to integrate those things. So my undergraduate degree was in environmental policy and behavior. And I set out kind of from the beginning to go to law school. Along the way, I realized that the things that interested me most about environmental policy were the doing research on that topic and teaching about that topic. And so while I continued to be interested in law as a way of moderating or helping people understand environmental behaviors and their impacts of other behaviors on the environment, I realized that I also really wanted to understand the system that creates those laws. And so that's why I also did a PhD in political science and focused on international relations. So how countries work together or don't work together at times to develop rules and norms for how to use natural resources. And that kind of, those interests have continued to evolve over time. And I think one of the things that became clearer and clearer as I went along, that I think maybe I didn't realize early on in that process, is that although we're talking about resources that are shared among communities and among countries, not everybody has the same experience with them. Mm-hmm. And so those different experiences that people have and the different levels of access that people have to resources and different quality of resources that they have access to has become increasingly of interest to me and maybe wasn't foregrounded at the beginning of that process.
Wow. Yeah, so tell us a little bit about the background behind you and how that relates to some of the different research projects you have.
Those are fishing boats on the coastline, the ocean coastline, Indian Ocean coastline in India. This is from a research trip there where we were, at that time we were just starting, but one of the things we wanted to understand is how communities experience the fishing policies. So in that area, there's a seasonal fishing ban that applies to all trawling vessels. So actually mostly not those smaller vessels that you see in that picture, but the larger vessels that trawl in particular for shrimp, but for other marine resources as well. What we were trying to understand is what do people do when they're told that they can't fish for 45 days, and that's their livelihood. So one of the things that we found, or were set out to find, was to understand how do people adapt to that situation, to those policies. But we also wanted to understand, again, does it affect everybody the same way, or are some people impacted differently by it? And then the last, and sort of tying it back together, was given those individual responses, are people actually complying with those rules and bringing about the protection of the fishery that was intended by that seasonal fishing ban?
Yeah, I was recently out fishing with Dr. Brian Roth, and he mentioned a trip to India. And I said, "What? I didn't know you had gone to India." He said, "Yeah, I went with Mark Axelrod." And I don't even remember what year he said that was.
It was more than 10 years ago, I think.
That's what I thought. I thought he said it was like 2009 or something like that. So um, so you talked about some kind of big important issues there. What do you think really is the most important issue that we're looking at today in terms of achieving sustainability in the future, or achieving a better future in terms of natural resources?
Well, I mean, I think it's what I guess I've mentioned a couple times to get a better idea of how different people are affected differently, both by the rules and by resource availability itself. Um, so not to take for granted that everybody, although we are all users of natural resources like air and water and land, and the fisheries that a lot of people depend upon either for livelihoods or for food, that not everybody experiences those or has access to them in the same way. And so trying to figure out how we make sure that people who are most vulnerable in their use or access to the resources are addressed in the processes we use to develop policies and develop decision making.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the small scale fishermen that own those boats in the background there aren't the ones always, that are depleting the resource so heavily, and yet their livelihoods and their ability to feed their families depend so heavily on that access to the resources. Um,
And actually, what was particularly interesting about this study is that we found the people who had the most difficult time during that seasonal fishing ban was the small scale fishers were allowed to continue fishing to some degree, not in larger vessels. And they had been involved in the discussions about making that policy. So it, to some degree, reflected their interests and their needs and demands. But the people who really had a difficult time were particularly women who don't fish, but who sell fish or who work on boats, work on boat maintenance and those kinds of things, and who would be deeply affected by the smaller amount of fish coming into harbor, but really had no say in the policy because they're not fishing and their particular actions weren't being directed by that policy, even though they were deeply affected by it.
yeah, yeah. And sometimes you leave people that are important actors and stakeholders out of the decision-making process just through, oversight or whatever. And yeah, it sounds like that was pretty problematic for those people. So the final question I'd like to wrap up with is asking if you have any advice or insights that you'd like to share with students who are just now embarking on their undergraduate career and undergraduate pursuit of fisheries and wildlife.
Oh, I just think there's so many opportunities to see and learn different things in different places from people with different experiences and perspectives. And I think the more we get an opportunity to see all those different ideas and concepts and experiences, the more prepared we are for what comes after and next stages of education or career. So I just think keeping our eyes open and seeing all those opportunities and ideas is really really important.
So I don't know if we mentioned this earlier on. What courses do you teach in fisheries and wildlife, and where might undergraduate students find you?
Well, I teach one course that's cross-listed with Madison College, which is FW and MC 450, International Environmental Law and Policy.
Okay.
And then I teach FW 813, which is Natural Resource and Environmental Governance. Even though it's an 800 level course, we do often have undergraduate students take that course. It's built in the kind of graduate seminar model, but we've had a lot of undergraduates who've been really successful experiencing that model if they were interested in digging deeper into the scholarship in that area. And then there's no other course that kind of has my name on it. I have taught a 1-credit seminar on environmental justice, and I guest lecture a lot, both in the
Yeah.
STEPS program and some other courses.
Yeah, I remember FW 181, you guest lectured for us in that. It brings up an interesting point that students should, as they get to their junior and senior year, not just look at, 300 and 400 level classes, but if there's a graduate level course that really interests them, to approach the professor and see if that might be a good fit, because you really can get an understanding of what graduate studies are like, and really get into some more interesting issues. So anything else, any last parting comments you'd like to share with the FW 101 students?
I don't think anything in particular, but everybody should feel free to contact me if they have questions or interest in the areas I'm working in.
Great. All right. Thank you.